I knocked on the heavy oak door at 2:00 p.m. on a Thursday, and when my daughter opened it, she looked at me like I had wandered in off the street, like I was a stranger asking for the wrong house. It was not a dramatic hurrah, no shattering of crystal or swords drawn like in the novels I used to swallow by the stove. It was a thin, polite smile that did not reach her eyes, a tilt of the head as if she were listening for the wrong name. "Mama," she said, the word empty as a pocket, then more hurried. "I can't, now is not a good time." Her voice was soft as silk, but its edges were sharp as a blade. She had on that gray coat, expensive wool, the one that always made my thrift store hands itch to touch it. And behind her, through the glass, I could see the hall that smelled faintly of lemon-scented polish and fear. I had come because I had promised. I'd told her I could help with the baby this weekend. I had a doctor's appointment that Friday at 10:30 a.m., an old appointment I'd kept for months. But when she found out the time, she said she needed me anyway. "Just for Saturday, Mama, that would mean everything." And I agreed, because what else does a mother say? Because my mason jar of coins and years of bowls of soup demanded it. Because mothers become doorways that always open, even when their frames are splintering. She glanced past me toward the mansion's marble foyer as if checking to see whether the portraits would approve of our meeting. The portraits, great-grandfather with his stern jaw, my daughter's grandmother with the powdered face, seemed to look away. The crystal chandelier caught the light and scattered it across the parquet like little conspirators. "You were supposed to come earlier," she said. "We have visitors, the baby and guests," and she paused and handed me one of those false smiles people use like bandages. "Maybe another weekend?" The first line of the old story is always a small thing, a missed appointment, a bent fork, a delayed letter. I remember thinking then that perhaps it was such a thing, a misstep in a life that had been generous to us both. Perhaps she had simply been very busy, or tired, or caught in traffic. I thought of the chipped mug in my kitchen, the one with the blue rim that I'd carried from house to house for 30 years, and how every crack in it told the story of a life lived. I thought of my pearls, the ones my mother had whispered into my hands the night I married my husband, rounded, slightly yellowed, still heavy with the memory of their salt. I clutched the mason jar in my bag without thinking, the jar that had been my small fortune. Coins and bills folded, saved from Sundays and from the knitting I did for neighbors. The jar was a map of my sacrifices. She closed the door gently, as if shutting out a draft, and I stood on the porch feeling for a second like those small, forgotten things, the chipped mug, the mason jar, the pearls. If things could be old and useful, could they also be wanted? Could what you saved be used to push you out? I went home that day with the taste of lemon polish in my mouth and a pocket full of unanswered questions. That night, I set my pearls on the kitchen table beneath the lamp, their small, round faces reflecting a light I could not quite name, and I made tea. The radio was whispering an old song my mother liked, the kind that stitches memory into the air, and I sat by the window, listening to the rain. I had raised this daughter with my hands. I had taught her to knot aprons and read the back of cereal boxes aloud when the nights were cold. There are things a mother keeps no bill for: nights of fever, sandwiches cut into triangles, the way to smear out tears with the heel of your hand. For all of them, I had expected not a reward, but a simple recognition, a chair at their table, a greeting, a place. The next day, April 3rd, 2 days before the gala her husband was throwing, the one that would fill every social page in town, I saw a photograph in the local paper. It was a glossy portrait of her and her husband, arms entwined, smiles polished for the public. I set my tea down too quickly and the cup trembled. On April 3rd then, while I had a dentist appointment to fix a cracked filling, "The crown you promised," the dentist had said, I thought of how quickly children could move into other worlds. 2 days before a gala, 2 days before a house full of invited people who would clap politely and not notice the absence of the woman who rocked their baby to sleep. The chips in my mug looked like tiny moons. I called her that evening. Her phone went to voicemail. Her assistant, a woman with an infinitely patient voice, told me she was unavailable and asked if I might leave a message. Her assistant knew to speak in that measured tone. People with polished homes hire voices to smooth over their edges. When I finally sat in her foyer again on the Saturday she'd asked me to come, I was carrying the mason jar, the jar I had always kept under the bread box that summer after my husband left. The jar rattled with the small clinks of coins like distant rain, and as I held it, I heard the sound of every small kindness I had done in my life accumulate into weight. I had never asked for much. Once, in 1991, I had asked to borrow $10 to coat the steps in salt when the ice came early and my neighbor had refused. I remember feeling small then, and I remembered the lesson like a bruise. She opened the door, and the baby was in her arms. He was a red-cheeked little thing with his grandmother's eyes, my granddaughter's eyes, wrapped in a soft blanket. He stared at me solemnly, as if judging whether my face was the one to trust. Her husband stood back, hands in his pockets, watching like a man who measures people with his glance. I held my breath. I had come to watch him that weekend because the doctor's appointment I had was at 10:30 on Friday. And I had said, I can do Saturday, tomorrow I have to go for a test. And she had smiled and accepted, and now she looked at me as if I had offered to take her garbage. "We're so sorry, Mama," she said. "It's just, we have plans Saturday morning. The brunch, the decorator arrives. Could you, maybe next weekend?" She lifted one shoulder in an apologetic shrug that carried the lightness of someone who had never cooked a meal for a sick child at midnight. I felt my hands go cold. "You told me to come," I said, and my voice came out like a crack in the ice. "You told me yesterday." Her husband cleared his throat, a sound like a locked box opening. "There's been a change," he said. The words were small but deliberate. They spoke as if they were assigning rooms in a house. We stood in the hallway, 3 people in a house that smelled of new wood and old money, and I felt the mason jar in my bag like a heart. In my mind, I could feel the mason jar's smooth glass against my palm, the small coins rolling like private prayers. I remembered the nights I had folded bills and tucked them into the jar. The nights I had said, if anything happens to me, this will help, and had pushed it under the bread box and forgotten it like a promise. The first escalation must be subtle to feel true. A missed visit, a small lie about a decorator, a plan that conveniently excludes. The first sting is small enough that you think perhaps you dreamed it, but sting begets sting. I left that afternoon with my pearls in my pocket and the bitter taste of misunderstanding. I told myself I would be patient, that perhaps there was a reason I could not see yet. I set the mason jar on my windowsill and watched the coins wink in the sun. The next morning, I woke to a letter on my doormat, a card from the grandson's nanny congratulating me for being welcome to visit any time. The handwriting was careful, as if someone had practiced kindness in a workshop and was now offering it as a prosthetic. The card did not mention the weekend I had promised. I went to the bank the next week and checked something I had not checked in years, the small savings account we had opened for emergencies. It had about $230,000 in it if I was honest with the numbers in my head, a sum that once would have seemed unthinkable, a sum that now felt fragile as the old pearls. I toyed with the idea of a durable power of attorney, of sorting things out while I could. I am practical in certain ways, even when the heart is burning. But the thought of lawyers, the pages with their imprinted gold seals, the form that would speak of competence and aging, made me want to hide under my covers like a child. That night in bed, I remembered a promise from long ago. I had once told my daughter, the night her father left, "No matter where you go, this house is yours." I had meant the house in the way a mother always means, hands to hold you up, a place to lay your weary head. She was a small, fierce child then, with wind-blown hair and knees always knobby with adventure. I had sewed patches onto her dolls, precise, patient stitches. I had saved the buttons from my coat because she liked the brass on them. The memory was sharp like a needle. By now my suspicion had teeth. I began to notice little things, a silence where there used to be laughter when she called. Invitations that arrived stamped RSVP for dinners where my name was conspicuously absent. And a way she spoke of we that always meant her and her husband, never the 3 of us. I found my chipped mug once on a shelf in a closet during a brief visit, placed delicately next to a box of taper candles as if on exhibition, not as a cup to be used. I had to remind myself that the cup had been with me through 3 apartments, 2 marriages, and the birth of my daughter. Seeing it placed there like a relic made my hands tremble. "I never expected to find my own mug behind a door," I said aloud once, and the house echoed my words back as if it had no answer. A neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, brought me her famous lemon tarts one afternoon, the aroma of lemon folding into the curtains like memory. She asked, "Have you spoken to Lila?" My daughter's name, and when I said yes, she paused, and then her eyes, kind and quick, asked what we were not asking. "Are you all right? Do you need anything?" She said it like she had already placed her hand on my back. I marveled at how people could feel things without being told. Several days later, I received a letter from the family lawyer, a man named Gregory Nolan, who had helped them with trusts and property for years. The envelope bore the heavy stamp of formality. Inside was a politely worded invitation to discuss the arrangements regarding household responsibilities and care. There was a subtlety to legal letters. They perform kindness with the same careful phrasing as a poison. Gregory's note suggested meeting at his office on April 17th at 11 a.m. to clarify expectations. He wrote, "It is always best to put understandings in writing to avoid future misunderstandings." I had never been invited to such a meeting before. The phrase "clarify expectations" felt like a contract being prepared in secret. I sat with that phrase, "clarify expectations," until the paper softened under my fingers. I thought of the mason jar again, its coins taking up their appointed roles like soldiers. I thought of the chipped mug and of the pearls, now a necklace of memory on my dresser. I felt like a character in one of those old revenge novels, the kind where betrayal takes time and is measured in pots of tea and missed birthdays. I began to overhear the soft sounds that house money makes, the faint clink of glassware being rearranged, the muted laughter of guests learning what to say over salmon and champagne. Once, as I looked through the grill of the community garden gate, I heard 2 voices in the alley, someone mentioning the transfer and another, lower voice saying, "We can't have her at the gala." The words landed like stones. I told myself to be patient. Yet patience in certain conditions is not virtue. It becomes silence that eats the bones. My daughter called one evening, and in her voice there was a strain of hurry I did not like. She said with a practiced lightness, "Mama, would you mind bringing the old pearl necklace for show? It would mean a lot to the guests." I did not like the way she said show. The pearls have always been mine. They belonged to my mother. When I wore them, I felt the press of generations round my neck. I said I would bring them, because a mother does not refuse her child's request. But when I arrived with the pearls wrapped in tissue, she placed them on a table with other heirlooms, like artifacts to be policed by the eyes of strangers. She asked me to sign a paper, just a formality, she said, an acknowledgement of loan for the necklace, written in her husband's careful hand. The man who stood with her husband, smiled with the kind of smile that belongs to people who have rehearsed warmth until it loses heat. I signed because I did not like to argue. I signed because the paper had a spot for my name, and beneath it the words, "for the duration of the event." I signed because the signature felt like a key that I handed to someone else. When I left that night, a champagne flute in a cleaning cloth, my hands shook not from age, but from a sense of erosion. The next morning, I found a thick envelope tucked under my door. Inside was a typed note from her husband's assistant informing me that the plan had changed. They no longer needed me for Saturday. Instead, they had arranged for professional care and suggested I take the weekend to rest. The note enclosed, absurdly, a ride voucher and the words, "No hard feelings." I read it twice, then 3 times, as if a new meaning could be coaxed out of the ink. I have always believed that betrayal begins with small accommodations. You give in one evening, and the next morning your chair is gone. You see the logic in their reasoning at first. Professional care is practical. A ride voucher is convenient. But in the quiet of the kitchen, I felt something else, the slow undermining of belonging. When I went back to the bank to look at the account records, because when suspicion grows, small acts of practicality feel like armor. There were withdrawals I did not recognize. Small ones at first, $300 here, $6,000 there. Then one that made me sit down, $23,000 withdrawn on May 2nd. The memo line reading, household renovations. I have never had a mansion, but the numbers in that account had been accrued by years of careful saving and a small inheritance from a distant aunt. The thought of those numbers being moved like chess pieces on a board where I was not allowed to look made my stomach hollow. I called Gregory Nolan. He was polite. He said, "Mrs. Bennett, those transfers were authorized by a durable power of attorney executed on May 1st. My mouth felt like flour. "Who signed it?" I asked. "We have the signature on file," he said. "It appears to be your daughter's handwriting." I pressed for the document. He sent a scan. The signature looked like hers, swift, practiced, but something in the way the ink pooled told me that someone had been careful. That night I took the pearls from the box and laid them out under the lamp. The light made them small suns. I put my hand over them and felt the faint tremor in my fingers. I thought of the chipped mug, of the mason jar under the bread box, the coins like small moons, and I felt the first true thunder of betrayal. Not for the money alone, but for the way it had been moved. The way my place in the world had been rearranged without my knowledge. I will close this part of my story here, pausing as one does on the edge of a steep climb, because the air there tastes different, colder and more certain. A woman can be patient until she is not, and patience is not a virtue that lasts forever when the ground under your feet begins to pull away. Justice, I have learned, is a slow bird. It perches and waits, but when it spreads its wings, the shadow it casts is long and final. I never expected what I found in that drawer. They told me patience would save me. They were wrong. After Gregory Nolan's clipped, careful words over the phone, durable power of attorney, executed May 1st at 09:15 a.m., Mrs. Bennett, I felt something cold and bright slide down my spine. I put the phone on the kitchen table and watched my hand tremble against the wood until the tremor matched the chime of the kettle. I had been at the dentist on April 3rd. I had not been at any lawyer's office on May 1st. The dates made a small, terrible constellation in my head. April 5th, the gala. April 17th, the Clarify Expectations meeting. May 1st, the POA. May 2nd, the $23,000 withdrawal labeled Household Renovations. The numbers were like clues left to tease me awake. I am not a woman who pretends to understand the fine mechanics of law, but I know what a signature means. My hand has signed grocery lists and love notes. It has signed permission to join school trips and letters to ministers. My name, written on a line, is a small pact between myself and the world. To see that pact given away as if it were a napkin ruined me. I called Gregory, and he sent me a scan. An obedient little PDF that looked like the coffin of my autonomy. The signature looked like my daughter's hurried hand. The ink pooled in the same way when she rushed to scribble a thank you note. But the document had a witness signature that belonged to someone I had never seen. I could have gone home and sat under my lamp and let the world fold itself quietly around the lie. That would have been the comfortable thing to do. But comfort is the cousin of complacency. It sits with a fat cat and watches the mice carry your crumbs away. I took the mason jar from under the bread box and went to see Mrs. Hargrove. She is a small woman with larger hands. She has a way of pressing her palms like someone who can smooth wrinkles out of trouble. She remembered when my daughter fell off the swing and I ran to get the Band-Aids. She remembers the pancakes we made for the neighborhood kids. "You mustn't go alone," she said. "Not now." She put 2 crisp 20s and a 10 into my palm, an act of currency and solidarity. "For looking into things," she said, and I felt braver for it. I hired a private investigator. His name was Omar Khalid, and he smelled of tobacco and warm leather and had a manner like a box that never fully opened. I carried a small portion of my savings, $1,500, from the mason jar to his office on May 12th at 3 p.m. He took the money and without smirk or surprise said, "Old women always know when someone chops at their roots." He had a habit of speaking in small, blunt sentences. He promised me he would look where lawyers and husbands preferred not to look, into physical spaces and into the small digital shadows people leave. The first thing Omar found was trivial and thus suspicious. Security footage from the parking garage of Gregory Nolan's law offices showed a woman entering on May 1st at 09:05 a.m. Her figure was compact, wrapped in a gray coat. She signed a visitor sheet, left with a small paper bag, and a man with a briefcase followed minutes later. The image was grainy, the kind of black and white that robs faces of warmth. But the coat was the same expensive gray coat my daughter preferred. The footage was time-stamped and cold. Omar printed it out and slid it across his desk. "She went," I said, and felt my voice bend. "She went there." "But Mrs. Bennett," Omar said. And here was the thing I had not realized until then. Evidence invites more questions than answers. The visitor log is not a signature. We need the notary's stamp, the witness affidavit, chain of custody. He had charts and a notebook with phone numbers. He was a man who made webs out of stray threads. I asked him to find the notary. He did, and the notary's name was a sound I will carry, Claudia Reyes. She answered the phone like someone answering guilt. "I never notarized anything for your daughter on May 1st, she said. "I was at home with my cat. I left my stamp at the office locked in my drawer." Her voice carried the small inflections of truth. Omar traced the courier who had collected documents that morning, an assistant who signed as R. Hale. The assistant's handwriting matched some of the scrawled notes in the POA packet. The more we looked, the more the pattern revealed itself like the underside of a moth's wing, pretty and meant to deceive. There was an email chain that Omar dug out of Gregory Nolan's trash bin. You must never trust how lawyers tidy. In it, an assistant instructed Gregory's staff, "Please prepare documents for Mrs. Bennett's signature and bring them to the house Sunday. Afternoon, discretion appreciated." It was sent on April 29th at 10:22 a.m. There was another note. "We will bring a notary. Please coordinate with R. Hale." The paper trail was a rope I was beginning to pull. I remember asking Omar, "Why would they do this?" As if the answer needed a mystery. He gave me a list like a butcher does with cuts of meat: money, control, insurance policy, ease. He named them like diseases. At some point in those days, my daughter called. Her voice had the same silk as earlier, but with a quaver of something else, an anxiety she kept babysitting with a smile. "Mama, why are you asking questions?" she said. "This is all a misunderstanding." When I asked why she did not tell me she had arranged professional care, she said, "You wouldn't understand. It's for the best." I thought of the pearls wrapped in tissue and displayed like trophies. I thought of the chipped mug on a shelf. I thought, too, of the nights I had sat by her bed when she had fever, and how I had found the strength to keep vigil. Omar found something else that should have been insignificant. A delivery log from May 1st. It showed that at 09:30 a.m., a courier had brought a manila envelope to the house, signed for by a person whose printed name read R. Hale. Inside that envelope was a USB drive. The idea that a small sliver of plastic could hold a life was amusing until I remembered how much of our lives we now entrust to such tiny things. We obtained the contents of the USB. It was a voice recording. I listened to my daughter's voice and heard something I had not expected. Instruction, a tone half professional, half urgent, as if she were coaching someone through a performance. "Make sure Grandma understands the form," she said, and there was a pause. Then the voice of a woman, R. Hale, I suppose, responded, "I will. We will be discreet. We'll have the notary ready." It was the sound of a plan unfolding against the grain of ordinary human decency. The recording was dated May 1st at 9:10 a.m. It was a rope thrown over a canyon. I played the file again and again, and each time it made the room smaller and somehow more full. My hands felt like pages being turned. There was the sound of coffee cups being set down, the faint scuff of shoes. My daughter's voice, crisp with purpose, said, "Ask her to sign here. Tell her it is a receipt for the pearls and the loan of the necklace for the gala. She won't read it carefully." I dropped the kettle, and the ceramic shattered with a little tragic symbol. I had the means then to speak to the police, to have a handwriting expert examine the signatures. But the law moves like a nobleman, slow, deliberate, and with a penchant for spectacles. I wanted something more immediate, more bearing. I wanted to stand in a room where the lies had been laid out like a banquet and point at the table and say, "This is your feast of dishonor." I thought of the pearls, of the mason jar, of the chipped mug. I thought of the way my daughter's eyes had turned away when I knocked at the door. My anger was a small, steady flame. The kind who eat revenge slowly like a bitter fruit, I thought, are often better nourished in the end. Dumas once wrote that vengeance is an art, precise and patient. I am not Dumas, but I had hands that knew how to make things last. I had patience and a little cunning. I told Omar to find a notary who could examine the alleged stamp and any witness affidavits. He called in favors like one would call in tabs at the grocer. We had the document examined by a proper handwriting analyst, Dr. Elise Hathaway, an elegant woman from the university with spectacles that made her eyes look like two calm moons. She told me the signature, though similar to my daughter's, had the wrong rhythm, the wrong pressure. It had been traced in a way the hand of the forger had tried to mimic my daughter's speed. "Look here," she said. "This pause in the T, it is performed, not natural." She wrote a short report, cold and clinical. I read it like I read a sentence in a book and felt the syllables of truth become heavy. We had a rope of evidence, the recording, the email chain, the courier log, the handwriting analysis. But evidence is not a verdict. It is only a petition. My daughter had resources. Gregory Nolan, an assembly of polite people who knew how to make explanations sound like virtues. I had only a mason jar and my past. One day, in the midst of our collecting, a small and surprising ally revealed herself. The nanny, Rosa, slipped me an envelope when I came by the back gate. She had been quiet at first, moving through rooms like a ghost who dusted only the edges of secrets. I had seen her with the baby, humming lullabies in a voice like warm bread. She held my hand, calloused, surprisingly strong, and said, "I can't speak much, but I could not bear them using you." Inside the envelope was a photocopy of a maintenance invoice dated May 2nd for $23,000 paid to Renovations, Inc. The invoice referenced work completed on May 1st and included a signature that, upon close inspection, looked startlingly like my own. The signature on the invoice was not mine, but the audacity to place my name there, it felt like a theft of years, not only of coins. Rosa's eyes were wet. "They told us to sign for deliveries," she whispered. "They said it was for accounting." Her words were small, but they landed on the table like stones placed to mark a boundary. As the web tightened, I felt my stoicism give way to a certain reckless clarity. I began to plot like someone who had never had the opportunity before. I would not simply accuse. I would orchestrate a moment where the truth could not hide behind polished smiles. In the novels I loved, the cleverness of the wronged is often measured by the creativity of their retribution. I had no sword, no treasure hidden on an island. I had only the truth and the will to force it into daylight. I arranged to attend the charity gala on April 5th after all, not by invitation, but by asking the flower vendor who delivered to the house if I might accompany him to drop off a bouquet for an old friend. The vendor, a man named Manuel, had hands like a carpenter and a heart that seemed to understand the secret economies of kindness. He left me at the back entrance, among the boxes and the staff. I slipped in like a small, forgotten scent and found a place where the staff stored purses and small trunks. The house was humming. Silverware chimed softly as the waiters practiced. Laughter rehearsed like a refrain. I moved like a person crossing a river on stones. I had a plan that felt like a prayer. I would borrow, briefly and without malice, the tools of their own deception and make them look upon themselves. I would not shout accusations in the drawing room where the portraits might scowl. I would instead let the documents speak where polite ears could not. I found the study. Its door was unlocked because servants often keep such doors open to the air of authority. Inside, the desk smelled of lemon oil and old paper. I slid into the chair and, like a cat who remembers the warmth of a sunny windowsill, I felt oddly at home. Beneath a neat stack of RSVPs and place cards, I found a small locked box. My hands, which had once sewn buttons and mended hems and soothed fevers, fumbled with the key I had smuggled in my pocket. My father's old key, which I had always kept for reasons that seemed quaint until now. The lock gave with a soft click. Inside the box were receipts, letters, and a manila folder labeled Mrs. Bennett, Estate Matters. My heart beat so loudly I thought the paper might tear. There were copies of a last will and testament, dated April 20th, a document that named my daughter as executor and contained lines that severed my rights like a sharp shears. There were also photocopies of the durable power of attorney, but more damning, a small, neat envelope with a Polaroid photograph showing my daughter and her husband at Gregory Nolan's office on May 1st, laughing, filing paperwork. The Polaroid's date was stamped May 1, 2025 at 09:48 a.m. I held the photograph and felt the ground shift under me. Then I found something else, tucked between the pages as if someone had wanted it hidden, but not lost. A small, folded note in R. Hale's handwriting. It read, "Grandma will sign if she believes it is for the necklace. Have notary bring receipt form." It was a sentence that read like an animal trap. I had my proof, the recording, the note, the photograph with the date, the fake invoices. The weight of it made me dizzy and strangely triumphant. I was no longer the woman who sat with a chipped mug and watched her life slip by in increments. I had been wronged, and now I had the wood and tinder to set the truth alight. Dumas taught that a soul once awakened to justice cannot sleep comfortably. The passion becomes a compass. I felt a similar thing. Something had shifted in me. I had been ladled soup and lullabies for decades. Now I would be precise and merciless as the law when it must be. A great and terrible peace washed over me. I would confront them, and the world would not be as it had been. I made a plan so simple and elegant that only a desperate person would have conceived it. Confrontation in public, with witnesses, where lies had less room to hide. The gala would be the stage. The portraits would be forced to witness it. I tucked the Polaroid and the note into my bag like small instruments. Manuel took me to the back of the house after the guests had arrived. I arranged with Rosa and Omar to have copies of the recording ready, to have Dr. Hathaway on call for handwriting testimony, and to have a printed sheet of the emails on every orphaned place card I could tuck into pockets. A woman's revenge is often a domestic thing. It is paper and pins and the clever use of teacups. Before I left the study that evening, I took my pearls from my bag and slid them onto my throat. They felt like a circle of calm. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window and saw an old woman lit by the city lights, a woman who had been wronged and who would not concede. I felt a dignity rise inside me, one I thought the grandchildren of my neighbors had misplaced in their hurry. The gala swelled with polite music and polite clinking. I moved through it like a specter, unheard until the moment I wished to be heard. I waited until speeches were almost over, until the room was full of the small smoke of conversation. And then I did the most ungentle thing I have ever done. I asked for the microphone. The hush that followed was like a linen sheet dropped across an angry thing. Everyone turned. My daughter's face, which had been smoothed for portraiture, drained color. She stepped forward, a mask of composure that was starting to crack. I put the Polaroid on the podium and set the recording to play. The room filled with the sound of my daughter's voice, directing the assistant to make sure Grandma signs here. I let Dr. Hathaway and Omar step forward with their documents. I let Gregory Nolan speak and feel the polite chamber of his kindness break. It was the turning point. I felt the room tilt. My daughter's hands were small and white and shook like autumn leaves. "Mama," she said, one single pleading syllable, and in it there were things I did not want to unravel in public. Fear, shame, perhaps a desperation born of a world that values smooth surfaces more than souls. She began to speak, the kind of words people use to build walls. It was for convenience, for the baby. But convenience and innocence are poor shelter for deliberate theft. I could see the guests shift, their eyes like small verdicts. Then, because every tale of justice must be paid with a price, or else it is not a tale at all, someone at the back of the room stood. It was Gregory Nolan's assistant, R. Hale. She walked toward the podium with a small envelope in her hand. The chandeliers trembled with a breath as she opened it and let out what she had long been hiding. I watched her face as if it were a map. She took a breath that tasted like resignation. She said, in a voice that belonged simultaneously to someone proud and terrified, "There is more." The envelope held something that made the air in the ballroom turn thin. The room held its breath with me. Dumas taught that the greatest revenge is the revelation. He also taught that such revelations often arrive wrapped in ironies. Did not know what she would reveal. Her envelope trembled in her hand as if the paper itself were tired of keeping secrets. R. Hale unfolded the sheet and read aloud, her voice thin and clear above the murmur of the room. On May 1st at 09 a.m., per instructions, I presented the receipt form as discussed. Mrs. Bennett was led to believe she was signing for the pearls. I notarized the document at 09:18 a.m. The notary stamp used was not mine. It had been switched in the office drawer earlier that morning. She looked at my daughter and then at the crowd like someone offering a confession she had carried too long. The chandeliers trembled with the silence that followed. The world tightened until all I could hear was the beating of my own heart. I remember thinking, with a clarity that felt both foreign and old, that there are moments in life when the soul chooses whether it will be a match or a mirror. That evening I had decided I would be mirror enough to return to them what they offered me. A Dumas sentence rose in me unbidden. One who plans a false feast may yet be undone by the hunger he thinks he feeds. I never expected what I heard next. R. Hale continued, and each word she spoke was a nail pulled from the coffin of their plan. She produced from within the envelope an affidavit. She had kept copies as insurance, she said, because she had never liked deceit. The affidavit contained the exact chain of messages. The April 29th email instructing Gregory's staff to prepare documents, the May 1st courier log, the recorded voice file where my daughter coached her through the formality. It had even the small instruction, make sure she thinks it is a receipt for the pearls. She won't read it carefully. The affidavit ended with R. Hale's signature and a line, I will testify if required. A woman's vengeance. I realized then, not the bitter kind but the necessary kind, requires an ally who will hold the lantern while you walk through shadows. Micro cliffhanger. The envelope had one more page. She did indeed have one more page. It was a typed transcript of a text message exchange between my daughter and Gregory's assistant, timestamped May 1st at 08:50 a.m., where my daughter wrote, "She won't suspect if we mention the pearls. I can handle Grandma." The signature at the bottom of the email chain, the one that had requested the notary, bore the initials of my daughter's husband underneath. The room was a bowl of held breath. I felt the Polaroid again in my hand, as if some small talisman were anchoring me. I did not cry then. My face felt oddly light, as if the pressure of a storm had lifted. Dumas liked to say that revelation is both blade and balm. It cuts and it heals simultaneously. I felt the cut, and I felt a healing that was born of being seen. The security cameras that night captured the slow unthreading of their composure. My daughter's husband went pale as a sheet, and the guests, people who had come on April 5th to toast success and sip champagne priced with the arithmetic of other people's labor, shifted like cattle sensing thunder. Gregory Nolan's jaw tightened. He blinked once, twice, as if computing how to invent a tale where truth could be gentled into plausible error. I had prepared for denials. That is what the law and people of means prepare, denials polished like buttons. But what I had not counted on was the human smallness at the heart of such plans. The assistant who keeps a photocopy, the nanny with a conscience, the notary who keeps a name on her lips like a bitter aftertaste. There are always threads that the schemers do not see. They forget that hands that once stilled fever are hands that also remember. Micro cliffhanger. Someone in the crowd moved toward the doors. Omar called in the police as the room emptied into whispers. Detective Sana Malik arrived at 10:45 p.m., a woman with a severity that announces itself like a bell. She requested the documents. She listened to R. Hale. She took the recording on a small official device. "We will need the original durable power of attorney," she said. "We will need witness statements." The words fell into me like pebbles. There is a bureaucracy to justice, forms to be filled, statements to be sworn. But bureaucracy is also scaffolding for truth. By May 10th, a week that felt both long and brief, we were back at Gregory Nolan's office again, not as supplicants, but as a party pressing a claim. Dr. Elise Hathaway's handwriting report was on hand, typed and stamped, and in it she had underlined the telltale pauses and pen lifts that betrayed a forgery. The notary, Claudia Reyes, provided an affidavit that she had not left her home on May 1st until 11 a.m. The courier's log, originally called misplaced, showed the manila envelope's route, and R. Hale's assistant admitted under questioning that the stamp had been taken out and switched. The room of polite men who had once seemed like mountains now looked like cliffs of sand. It is peculiar how quickly people who are used to arranging facts to suit themselves find their voice gone when facts refuse to bend. My daughter tried to speak to me in private. She begged me to understand the pressure, the debts, the accelerated expenses of a life she had chosen. She said she had feared losing their place in the community, feared the gossip that eats brands for breakfast. She spoke of a loan that they meant to pay back. Here is something personal. Love can be the motive for crime as often as greed. It is a sad arithmetic, but the law does not count motives as absolution. The law cares for evidence and harm. Charges were filed, alleged forgery, fraud, and grand theft by deception, terms that sound cold, but which carry within them the warmth of contingency and the risk of disgrace. On May 12th at 2 p.m., a warrant was issued to freeze the account that had seen withdrawals, the one with approximately $230,000, the $23,000 labeled household. Renovations on May 2nd was temporarily blocked, and a forensic accountant began to trace the flow of funds. Micro cliffhanger. I waited for the bank to answer. The bank's voice was a sequence of careful phrases. "We are reviewing the request," they said. In the end, the bank placed a temporary hold while the investigator audited the transfers. They returned to me a ledger with entries that made my hands sweat. Payments to Renovations, Inc., wire transfers to an offshore vendor, and a recurring $5,000 monthly transfer labeled consulting to an account in another state. The forensic accountant, a man with kind but tired eyes, told me, "We can recover some funds, but full restitution will require a judgment." Legal remedies are neat in theory. They are long and expensive in practice. But I had something else now besides money. I had public truth. A hearing was set for May 20th at 10 a.m. in the municipal courthouse. I remember the day as if it were a photograph that someone had decided to overexpose. Too bright to see detail, but impossible to ignore. The press had a way of arriving where drama gathers. Cameras blinked like stubborn eyes. I wore the pearls to court because I wanted the weight of my history at my throat. Each pearl felt like a witness. The gallery was filled with neighbors, with strangers who had read the story in the evening page, and with some who had not. My daughter sat to my left, her hands small and hot. And when she looked at me, there was a pleading in her pupils I could no longer read as entirely culpable or merely human. Dumas would have reminded us, when the balance is tipped by betrayal, the scales demand a reckoning beyond private tears. The judge listened to the petition, reviewed the affidavits from R. Hale and Claudia Reyes, heard Dr. Hathaway's testimony, and reviewed the notarized recordings and emails. On May 22nd, the judge issued a temporary restraining order, revoked the durable power of attorney as of May 1st for lack of valid witnessing and possible forgery, and ordered that the account remain frozen pending further civil proceedings. It was a small legal triumph, administrative, cautious, but it felt like a cup of cool water after a long fever. Micro cliffhanger. The press asked my daughter one dreadful question. Under the courthouse steps, a reporter asked my daughter, "Why did you think it was acceptable to orchestrate your mother's signature?" The camera lens made small the space between us like a blade. She answered with words that would have been softer in private. "I was desperate," she said. The words fell on the ground and did not lift. There were consequences not only in law, but in the court of public opinion. On May 25th, invitations were quietly rescinded from the social lists that had once welcomed them. They lost a board position, a partnership dissolved, an invitation to a charity they had hoped would secure their social standing. Social capital, I learned, is as fragile as spun sugar. But money and social deaths are not enough if dignity is still broken. Part of the healing for me required more than restitution. It required the return of my place within my family, the recognition that I had a right to be a person, not a prop. There were afternoons when I found my reflection odd. I had been the caregiver for decades, and learning to receive care for myself without shame was a new apprenticeship. I needed not only the bank's ledger to be corrected, but also the small things, the phone calls, the dinner invitations, the quiet morning visits that stitch kin back together. What happened next was quieter, but in some ways, more devastating to them. The trust between my daughter and her husband began to unspool. Accusation begets defense. Defense breeds secrets. Old resentments we had only glimpsed in passing now came to light. He had been the one who suggested using Gregory's influence. He had been the one who thought paper could rearrange loyalty. In the end, it was he who packed a small suitcase one morning and left the house with a single, sullen glance that tried to be final. The press called it a separation. The neighbors called it cautionary. In private, my daughter's tearful calls continued. She asked for forgiveness, and I, who had been wronged by her, wrestled with the shape of forgiveness. A Dumas aside seemed necessary here. As if my conscience needed a cloak of grandeur, vengeance, when it arrives cleanly, does not only punish, it instructs. It teaches that dignity is not a coin to be lent and taken. Micro cliffhanger. There was one document left to find. We still needed the original physical pages, the will dated April 20th, and the original durable power of attorney file. Gregory Nolan's office, for all its polish, had misfiled them in the panic. When they were found and turned over on June the 2nd, the will bore my daughter's name as executor, but the signatures were now under intense scrutiny. The handwriting expert testified that the will's signature had been lifted from a grocery list I had signed in 2019, copied in the margins. The cleverness of the fraud was crueler still, a forgery so intimate it used my own motions against me. The court appointed a receiver to oversee the estate accounts while the civil case moved forward. The civil suit was not swift. Litigation is the slow art of attrition. We filed for declaratory judgment to invalidate the April 20th will. Gregory's firm, cornered by evidence and fearful reputations, offered a settlement. Restore $50,000 immediately. Pay for legal fees up to $10,000. Issue a public apology. It was not everything, but I accepted the settlement with a personal condition. A public retraction and an apology in the local paper and at the neighborhood association meeting. And the return of the pearls to my possession, no longer to be loaned for display. Pride and restitution both demanded that small dignity. On June 18th, a quiet ceremony took place at my kitchen table. My daughter came with hands that trembled. She set the pearls on the table and said, in a faltering voice, "Mama, I am so sorry." It was not a theatrical apology. It was a child asking for balm. I took her hands, those same knobby hands I had once dressed in ribbons, and I said, "I forgive you." Forgiveness, I had learned in the long nights, is different from forgetting. It is a decision to step away from the rage, but also a boundary set like a fence. I told her that I would help find her steady work and that I would not see the grandchildren taken into care by professionals simply because she was tired. She promised to be seen by a counselor and to rebuild trust. We agreed on practicalities. She would not have financial control again. We would set up a joint account for necessary expenses and a professional trustee to oversee the larger sums. Micro cliffhanger. I found a note in my daughter's handwriting that changed everything. Weeks later, tucked in a book I had lent her, I found a small, creased note. It read, "Mama, I did this because I was afraid. I thought money would solve it. I was wrong. There were no excuses, only admission." It was a little thing, but when someone rights their wrongs and folds them into the margins of another's life, the space between people can begin to stitch. I kept the note in my locket. Justice in these months had several faces. The legal system had its measured steps, charges filed, a criminal pretrial where my daughter accepted a diversion program including restitution and community service, a public apology, and a civil settlement that restored some of the funds, about $73,000 initially returned into the frozen account with further payments scheduled. The bank unblocked access to my medical discretionary funds and set a new security protocol requiring my direct signature for transfers over $5,000. They issued a new passbook on June 30th. The numbers did not all return, but a ledger had been corrected. More meaningfully, my place at the table was restored in small, human ways. My daughter began to call more often, not in panic, but in ordinary cadence. She brought my favorite lemon tarts on July 4th and sat and ate 3 with me like a child trying to learn how to be steady. She came to my doctor appointment on a Wednesday in August, my regular checkup now scheduled at 10:30 a.m., and she sat in the waiting room without trying to control me. She learned, as I had, that repentance is a daily practice. There is cruelty in the world, and there is beauty in response. The pearls are back at my throat. The mason jar sits under the bread box, its coins clinking like small promises. I attended a neighborhood meeting where Gregory Nolan's firm's name came up like an old bruise. They had lost clients, and their reputation had narrowed like a river in drought. R. Hale left her position and found a job with a local nonprofit. She sent me a card on my birthday and wrote, "I'm sorry I kept this for so long. I should have done it sooner." I sent her a plate of lemon tarts. Dumas taught that a man may be ruined by his success as quickly as by his failure. I think the same is true for families. Excess, whether of coin or of pride, tends to destroy quietly. Now, as I sit at my kitchen table and tap the pearls with my finger, I feel the slow mending of many small things. Some are monetary, some are reputational, some are honest and tender. I do not pretend the past unhappened. There are days when the memory of being told I was not needed turns my stomach. But truth, when coaxed into daylight, has a peculiar habit of setting bones. The police closed their report in late July after the pretrial diversion was completed. My daughter served community hours teaching cooking classes and helped a local senior center as part of her restitution. The civil payments continued in installments set by court order. The remaining funds will be restored over time. If there is a single moral I would offer, one that Dumas might nod to, perhaps with a rueful smile, it is this: dignity is not inherited through deeds alone. It is kept by daily acts of decency. The proudest wall can crumble if those who live within forget the mortar of honesty. Micro cliffhanger. There is still one thing I make sure of every morning. When I make my tea and set my chipped mug on the table, I count my coins in the mason jar and lay a small slip of paper with the date inside the jar as a ledger. It is not about the money. It is about the witness. I write, June 30th, account corrected. July 15th, first restitution. August 3rd, daughter begins counseling. These daily notations are a small ritual of stewardship. I tell this story not to boast, but to warn and to comfort. If my tale touches you, it is because you may one day need the courage to look for the threads others have hidden. Power often tries to perform benevolence. Sometimes benevolence masks a hand reaching to take more than it gives. Do not be ashamed to ask questions. Keep your papers in order. Keep a friend like Omar's bluntness in your pocket and a woman like R. Hale in your corner. Keep your pearls and your mug close, and to those who have been wronged and feel too old or too small, you are neither. Age is a map, not a shackle. I had to learn that the voice that can shake a room is sometimes the voice that has sung lullabies in the night. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs the courage to reclaim a small truth. Comment below if you have ever faced a betrayal and how you found your way through it, because your story matters. And if you'd like to hear more from this old heart, more small philosophies, more hard-won lessons, then subscribe. I have a kitchen full of kettles, a mason jar full of coins, and many more nights of stories yet to tell.